So in this video, I will compare the Fenix 6 generation here on my left versus the Fenix 7 generation here on my right. On my left, I have the Tactix Delta Solar. So it does have a Sapphire screen with a solar panels underneath. And this is the only watch in the Fenix 6 series that has Sapphire and solar. Other than that, it's just the design differences compared to the Fenix 6. Underneath is completely the same hardware. And on my right here, I have the Fenix 7X Titanium Sapphire. So the highest end model, at least currently, that you can get on the market. So it is Sapphire versus Sapphire, solar versus solar. So let's just get into this. First off, let's just talk about some hardware differences. And the thing that actually I wasn't that excited about, but I actually kind of like right now, I ended up liking after 1 week of using the 7X as my primary watch, is actually touch. That you can touch the screen, not only to swipe between widgets and settings and so on, but actually the fact that when it's dark and of course nighttime, if you want to turn on the backlight on the screen, all you have to do here is just tap the screen and the backlight will come on. That is just such an amazing little thing there that I've actually come to like quite a bit, and probably one of the features that it does so that, or make it so that I cannot really go back to a Fenix 6 series. You have to, of course, press the physical light button here on the top left to actually get light on the screen of the Tactix Delta. Of course, I have a lot of studio lights going down towards the watches right now, so you can't really tell if the backlight is on. At least I don't think you can. But just touching the screen, the backlight comes on. That's just such a used feature. And on top of that, of course, you can navigate the whole UI with touch. Just going through your widgets, so much easier. Although I find myself often just reaching for the buttons, not because it is easier or better, but just because I'm so used to doing so. But once you kind of get used to the touch interface, it is definitely hard to go back to a screen that doesn't have any kind of touch at all. So I like the fact that we have touch on the 7 series, and I feel like that's a little bit of a game changer in the time we live in now when all our smartphones and so on, a lot of the devices we are using every day does have touch interface, so just makes it so much easier to get in and navigate this watch compared to, of course, having to click physical buttons. And also like the fact that you don't need to use the touch on the Fenix 7 series. You can do everything like with the older models. If you don't want to use touch, the default hotkey is just hold the down button and the start button together a few seconds. And you can see touch is disabled, and now touch doesn't work anywhere in the UI, and you have to resort back to those hardware buttons. And of course, you can just combine the two. If you want to use touch to swipe down through some widgets, or you want to use the buttons, you can do both of them at the same time. So I really like that. And I feel like that's a major upgrade coming from the 6 series. Other than that, I have noticed some UI changes. Not only if you get into settings, you still have to press a physical button on the 7 series to get into settings. But you can see right off the bat here, we have a white background on the settings screens on the 6 series. But we have now switched to a black background and white text on the 7 series. I'm not really sure why, but I suspect that it's because of the Epix series that's, of course, also out now with a touchscreen and an OLED display, because that uses OLED, and OLED just doesn't use any power when you have a black screen. So I think they just want to have more consistency between all of the lines now, between the Epix and the Fenix series. But I kind of like it actually. So all the settings here is with black screen, and you can see that I'm trying to swipe the screen on my Tactix Delta. And also there are some slight differences to the setup or settings. For instance, if you get into like system here, you have now the ability to set up a more detailed sleep functions here. So you can set your sleep functions every day. So what kind of time intervals you want to sleep or not be disturbed and have a different kind of screen. You can set time for each individual day on the 7 series. That's not something you can do on the 6 series. You only have do not disturb, and you can just enable it or not enable it, and you can have it on the sleep, but you can set it much more up in detail here on the 7 series. I really like that, because you can also set different watch face here. So a sleeping watch face that is much less intrusive than the default watch face. And you can enable or disable touch when you're sleeping, do not disturb, enable when you're sleeping. And of course, you can also enable battery saver, because if you want to save some battery, that's a good time to do it when you're actually sleeping. So I really like that feature as well. So there are some small changes throughout the UI. Nothing major though. Else you can see here, if we get it back into the screen here, the setup screen, pretty much here we have the same exact menu points there. So nothing had really changed that much when it comes to all the settings here. There are some slight variations, but yeah, I kind of like how they have updated some of the features here of the 7th generation. Another new thing, of course, we have some new watch faces. So let's just go through them quickly here. So these are the default watch faces. So the first one here on the right, the Fenix 7, and on the left here, the Fenix 6th generation. So this is the Tactix Deltas, because yeah, you can see they have Tactix on the screen, but I believe it's the same with the Fenix series of watches, at least if you have the Fenix 6X or some of the higher models, high-end models. The base model doesn't get all these watch faces, but you can see here there are some new ones here on the 7 series, which is kind of nice. I always like to see new watch faces. I tend to stay away from watch faces from Connect IQ Store, because sometimes it will just drain the battery, sometimes it will make the watch a little bit slower. So I really like having a lot of watch faces standard on the watch from Garmin. So there's quite a few new watch faces actually here on the 7 series. And that's kind of nice, but you also have some of the same ones. For instance, the one here on the, see here on my 7 series, we also have that of course on the 6 series, but it's a little bit different. And of course you can also set it up with the digital clock instead of having analog here. But other than that, we have a lot new watch faces. And we also have the standard old one here from the Fenix 6 series of watches. So yeah, kind of like that. Newer watch faces, always a great thing. And of course on the solar versions of the Fenix series, you do get those solar specific watch faces where you have the little solar plot there throughout the day. And you do get some more retro style here watch faces as well on the newer models. So yeah, newer watch faces, I totally dig that. And one thing I always do with my watch faces on my vintage watch, I just keep it as basic color-wise as I possibly can, because I found that the bigger contrast you have between black and white, whether you are having a black background or a white background for your watch face, it is much easier or clearer to see, especially when you have these like Sapphire screens on, because yeah, they do have quite a bit of reflections and can have some issues with some lighting to actually see the watch face. I still feel like the 7 series is a little bit better, even though the reflections is bigger on the watch face. I feel like it's a little more transparent, and I've had no issues looking at the clock throughout the day with minimal lighting, indoor condition. I can pretty much see the watch face. Sometimes, of course, I have to turn on the backlighting, but I feel like the 7 series is a little bit better than the 6 series, for me at least. But it is not really night and day. Sapphire is not really the best screen if you want the best clarity. So you should go with just the Gorilla Glass versions if you want the best screen quality or the best clarity of the screen. But I find that Sapphire is fine for me, and I don't really notice it after a few days of using. But you can see here a lot of glare. But at certain angles, for instance here, you can see my Tactix Delta is completely washed out, or the screen is completely lit up here by the light source, just at a little off angle there. Versus the 7X, you can see the reflections there is quite a bit bigger. And I think both of them is not the best, but you can see definitely shows my face there a little more clearly on the Tactix Delta here compared to the 7 or the 7X here. So whether you get the Sapphire or non-Sapphire screen, of course, totally up to you. I really like Sapphire screen because I don't really have to take that much care of my watch. Always end up scratching my screen at some point, and that totally annoys me more than having a lower transparency of the screen. You can also see here in your activities, you have a white background again there on the Tactix Delta / Fenix 6 series. You have a black background on the 7 series. But one strange thing, or one minor thing there, when you get into a activity, then default the background is white, like they are with the older generation here. And when it comes to an activity or all the data screens you can have on there, it's pretty much the same, except for, of course, now you have the stamina screen. I find the stamina screen quite useful, actually. I haven't really done anything that extensive that I really need it, but when I go out and do some tempo runs or interval runs, you can kind of see immediately that it's just draining your stamina quite a bit there. And once you have your little break there and run a little slower, you can see it just recharging again. So it's kind of in real time an estimate of your stamina or how much energy or how much you have left in the fuel tank. Could be quite useful, and I kind of like that little feature there. But I'm not really sure it's worth getting a 7 over the 6, and I don't think we will see that come down to the 6th generation. I think Garmin will only have that on the 7th generation, but that's just my opinion. Garmin sometimes can surprise. It's not really a reason to buy the 7th generation, but other than that, you pretty much have the same data screen and the same amount of data fields on each screen, same activity, except for on the 7 series, you can do the moment picture here of your health. So every day for 2 minutes, you can take like a snapshot of your health where you just take your pulse, your pulse ox reading, so your blood oxygen reading, and some other metrics for 2 minutes, and you can kind of compare this day by day, but you kind of have to do that every day and do it at the same time of day. I kind of forget to do so, and I haven't really found it all that useful. In terms of speed, compare these two watches here, I haven't really noticed that much of a difference. Let's just go in here and look at this benchmark here. According to this benchmark, which is a little app you can download from the Connect IQ store, you can see I'm getting a CPU score of 4.0 here on the 6 series and a CPU score of 9.4 here on the 7X series, and 55.6 pipes and 27 pipes here on the 6th generation. And of course you do have the newer Connect IQ version, and you can see the software version I am running there. But other than that, synthetic benchmarks, I haven't really noticed that much of a speed improvement. Maybe just a little bit better frames throughout the UI, a little smoother animations and such, but it's not really faster when you want to get into an activity and so on. Let's just try this little 3D benchmark here and see how many frames we can acquire here with the 6th generation. Well, you can see the 7th generation is pretty locked 10 frames there per second. The 6th generation is, around the 5 and 6 frames. So just drop to 9 frames. Yeah, between 5 and 6 frames here on the 6th generation, and 10 frames, 9 and 10 frames here on the 7th generation of watches. Again, other than synthetic benchmarks, I'm not really sure you will notice any difference, but there is definitely a difference. I would say probably, according to these benchmarks, you should look at a 2 times improvement here in terms of the raw CPU and GPU power in the newer watches. So that's a pretty good generational bump. And maybe in the future we'll see some activities or some apps or Connect IQ apps and so on that will really take advantage of that CPU and GPU power. But as of now, it's not really something I found an issue. The older watches still plenty fast. And let's just try and get out here and get into a run activity. My run activity is the first one on the list. So let's just press the button twice here. And you can see we're pretty much the same speed going into a run activity. Let's just try that again. I'm pressing the button pretty much the same time. And one thing I've noticed, there is a little bit of delay when you're actually getting into your activity screen here on the 7 series or 7X here. Let's just press the start button one time. You can see it just takes a little bit longer to actually get into run activity here, which is kind of strange. And let's just try and go down to another activity. Let's go into hiking and press the button at the same time. It is a little bit faster on the 7X. Would you really notice unless you're comparing side by side? I'm not really sure. Let's just go into rail running and press the start button here. Yeah, definitely a little bit faster on the 7X when you are in the activity screen, but when you're actually coming from the watch face, for some reason, it's a little bit slower to get to the activity screen and then get into your activity. It's about the same. I suspect that it will be fixed on the 7X in firmware updates. I suspect this as a little bit of a bug, that it should be slower at getting into an activity, but the 6 series definitely doesn't feel slow or have felt slow for me at any point. But like I said, maybe in the future we'll see some activities and data screens or Connect IQ apps that will take full advantage of the extra power. And when you're in mapping screen here, just scrolling your map, it is just so much easier to use the touch interface. Again, that's just a nice improvement here. You can also zoom in and zoom out using the touch interface, or you can just use the buttons as well on the 7X. And you can also double tap if you want to zoom in, and you can hold your finger at a certain point if you want to navigate to there, or you can see what kind of stuff there is around you. Of course, on the Tactix Delta and the 6th generation and all the previous generation of Fenix watches, so you have to long press the middle button here to get into zoom and moving around the map. And once you have done so, you need to switch between different modes here, either zoom in or zoom out using the buttons there. pan up or pan down, which of course is a little more cumbersome than just touching the screen and zooming in and zoom out. Also a little bit faster on the 7X when you're actually navigating the map. It's faster at drawing the map. Definitely have noticed that. Not again night and day, but it is just a little bit faster, and also a little bit faster when you're using the compass. I just don't want to show you my location right now, but when you're actually moving the watch around, the compass will be a little bit faster at actually moving the actual map around according to your body or your wrist direction there. So definitely a little bit faster and a much easier way of navigating the map here with the touch interface. So that's definitely a big upgrade again, the touchscreen there, especially in mapping. Else, when you just want to browse around the widgets here, maybe a little bit faster on the 7X when you're just clicking a button very fast. There you can see I'm pretty much clicking the button equally as fast. On the Tactix Delta is a little bit behind, and the 7X is just following my button presses there. So if I press the buttons very fast, the widgets there, you can go down the little widget screen there pretty fast. But you can see on the Tactix Delta, if I press the button very fast, it will just keep the same speed pretty much, and it will be a little bit behind actually. So again, slight difference there. And let's just go into some of the widgets here. First off, let's go into weather, and let's see if I have weather here. And you can see there is also some differences within the widgets. So there's no real difference in resolutions between the two. I believe it's exactly the same screen, probably even exactly the same manufacturer and everything. Haven't noticed any better colors or anything like that. You can see, for instance, the weather here. It's been updated a little bit, so you don't get air quality on the 6th generation in the weather widget. So that's kind of a new addition here, and that's actually kind of useful if you want to go out and run. How moist is it and how dry is the air? So you can kind of calculate your run around that. So that's a new screen. And I've also noticed a little bit of a different font in some widgets. For instance, if you go in here to your sunrise and sunset widget, of course, you're pretty much exactly the same information, a little bit different layout on the 7 versus the 6. And you can also see actually the time here for the sunrise and sunset is a little bit different. Not only the font, but yeah, it's a little bit bigger here on my Tactix Delta, I would say. And also the today shows, or today like little sun up there. And also the data around here for the sunrise and sunset is a little bit bigger. So small differences there again. Let's get into the ABC widget here. So you can see pretty much identical. No real difference there, other than of course they're a little bit off, and you can see actually the graph looks different on the 7X compared to the 6th. But other than that, pretty much identical. And the compass, yeah, they're not totally in line with each other, but close enough. But the compass look pretty much identical as well. If you want to get into your activity on your watch, you also get a vastly different screen on the 7. And I really like the 7 over the 6. It's the little things. You kind of get the same-ish information, but just a little more detailed on the 7. So let's just get into this activity here, for instance. So on the 7th generation, you can get back into the screen you get right after a run or an activity, but just pressing it and loading it back in. But on the Tactix Delta or the 7th generation, you can only really see the details here. If you go into more details or all statistics, excuse me, you can of course see your training effect. This was just a basic run I did today, heart rate and so on, but you cannot get back to the same screen that you see after a run. And I really like the new screens on the 7 as well. You get a little more detail, a nice graph there of your activity, what kind of heart rate zone you are in the most of the time here. So it's just a slow run today to get some low anaerobic exercises, but this is exactly the same screen you see after a training or a workout, and you cannot really reproduce that on the 6th generation for some reason. You can only really go in and see the statistics in text. So that's a new upgrade, and I really like that as well. So you can kind of get back into that screen, and also like the new screen you get here when you are done with your workout. Very helpful. And I've not really tested the step widget, as he's pretty much the same. Let's get into the sleep widget and just have a look at those data. Of course, we did get the update to the first beat sleep data on the 6th generation quite recently, and of course it's already built into the 7th generation. But you can see, other than font is a little bit different, it's bigger text here on numbers on the 7th generation. Other than that, you are getting pretty much the same data here on the screens. And again, the information going around the screen here is a little bit thicker on the 6th generation. Not really sure why Garmin made it so much thinner here on the 7th generation. But other than that, you get pretty much exactly the same information. Just a little bit different font there. One very new improvement, or welcome improvement, with the new solar versions of the 7th generation of watches, is now you can actually see how many lux hours you have actually acquired sun, or how much sun you have actually acquired that day in lux readings. You can see here on the Tactix Delta and 6th generation of watches, solar watches, you didn't really get an estimate of how many lux you have actually accumulated throughout the day. You can just see a graph from 0 to 100 right here through the last 7 hours. And you can of course go into your Garmin Connect app if you want to see it throughout the whole day. But now you can actually see how many lux you have actually acquired. You need to have 50,000 lux per hour, at least 3 hours of day, of 50,000 lux, excuse me, to get those battery performances or improvements that Garmin is advertising on their website. And now you can keep a track of that. So you need to have 150,000 or 150 here in the top lettering lux throughout the day to be able to get that. Of course, if you get more than that, then you will just get a better battery life. But it is a nice improvement to actually get some kind of a number on how much sunlight you've actually accumulated and charged the watch throughout the day. And of course, you do also have a lot of quite a bit bigger sun cells on this time around. I believe it's 2.5 times bigger. The one that is around the watch, or around the screen of the watch. See a little bit closer there. You can barely see it on my Tactix Delta. It is the solar version, believe me. And you can see here on the right, we have the 7th generation. So quite a bit bigger solar cells around the screen itself, but the density of the sun panel on top of the screen is actually 7% on the 7th generation and 10% on the 6th generation. So a little less efficient at actually acquiring sun when it comes to the actual sun you get from the screen itself. But with the ring around the screen, you're about 2.5 times better, and also a more efficient chipset. So you can actually get up to 3 times as much power from the sun charged to your battery. So that's definitely a nice bonus there. So it's winter time now here in my country. You can see I did do a run a little earlier, but didn't really acquire that much sun. So I look forward to actually testing this when it will be summertime here in Scandinavia where I live. So I suspect I will actually this time around feel it, maybe a few extra days of battery life, or maybe even more with the newer 7th generation. So I feel like it's a better investment now to get the solar version, but still, of course, not something you kind of need. It is just nice to have, not need to have, in my opinion still. Of course, one new hardware change here is, of course, also the heart rate sensor underneath the watch. So we have the Elevate 3 here on the 6th generation, and we have the Elevate 4 here on the 7th generation on the right. And they do pretty much a similar job. I would say the 4th generation is a little bit faster at detecting, spikes in your heart rate, but it's still not perfect. You should definitely consider getting a chest strap if you want more accurate heart rate reading, especially if you're doing interval and fast runs, and also just for slow runs. I've just found it a little, maybe 2-3 beats too high according to my actual heart rate. So it is an upgrade, especially if you use pulse ox. So if you want to measure your blood oxygen level, much better on the Elevate 4 heart rate sensor, much faster and much more reliable, and get more accurate reading. So it's actually usable now. So that's a big improvement compared to the Elevate 3 heart rate sensor, where I often did not get an accurate reading, or if it could even read my blood oxygen level at all. And it took quite a bit longer. I mean, up to 3 times faster on the 7X, compared to sometimes just didn't want to measure my blood oxygen level. And if it did so, it just took a lot of time. So yeah, I will believe that's the biggest upgrade with this Elevate 4 heart rate sensor. If you really want the best heart rate when you're doing your activity, get a chest strap. I just did so myself. I've tried all of these Elevate 4 heart rate sensor on the Forerunner 945 LC and the Venue 2 as well. And now it's the Fenix 7, and I also have the Epix. I just get a little bit too much inconsistency between my runs, and also depending on which arm I'm actually carrying the watch and how tight I have it and how high I have it on my arm, and so on and so on. But it definitely is an improvement. It's a little bit faster at detecting your heart rate and a little more accurate. But the biggest upgrade is the blood oxygen measurement. So if that's important to you, I believe this is so much better. But you can also just get a fingertip blood oxygen measurement device for next to no money, and just kind of save you a little bit there. But for slower runs, there's not that much of a difference between the two. It's only really if you're doing a little bit of a faster run and your heart rate is climbing and falling fast, you'll get a little bit better reading, but still nothing compared to a dedicated chest strap. And in terms of charging these watches here, you can see you use exactly the same charging plug there on the bottom. And through my testing, you also get exactly the same charging speed. So the 7 is not faster at charging. You still have those around 0.25 amps. So that's kind of a slow charging. That's both a bad and a good thing, because the faster you charge these batteries, the faster they will also kind of deplete, or you will kind of lose capacity faster over time. So slow charging is always the best if you want the best longevity of your batteries. But I definitely would have liked to see a little bit of faster charging, especially if you're only charging like once a month, like with the 7th generation. Then it would be nice to just be able to charge it a little bit faster. So still exactly the same charge speed, so no upgrade there at all, and also exactly the same cable and plug and everything. So of course, we also have some hardware changes to the physical design of the watch. Of course, the Tactix Delta is a little bit different compared to the 6X generation, or the 6th generation in general. But you can see here, it's pretty much the same with the screws all the way around the bezel, which of course have been moved around. So you have 4 screws in the little slots there for the actual watch band. Buttons, at least on both of my units here, are fantastic, both on the 7X and on the Tactix Delta. Very nice and clicky and responsive. But I do really like the knurling there on my Tactix Delta, which is not on the Fenix or any of the Fenix watches for that matter, of the 6th generation and so on. Other than that, you can see here the sensors for the barometer and altimeter and so on is also pretty much the same spot, and buttons pretty much the same place. But of course you have the guards there for the start stop button, so you won't accidentally press it if you're switching out jacket or anything like that, which is a nice added little upgrade there. Never had issues with my Fenix. But a Fenix 6 series watch, but that's definitely a little bit of an upgrade for people who had issues with that. And other than that, it is a little bit slimmer, a little bit lighter, because this is of course also the titanium version versus the steel version here of the Tactix Delta, but you can also get the 6th generation of course in titanium as well. But one kind of a downgrade with the 7th generation is those studs there, or splits that actually is holding the watch band in place, is non-removable this time around. And not like you have to use screwdrivers or anything like that to remove it, but you cannot remove it at all without breaking it, at least to my knowledge. Maybe some way in the future we'll know if it's actually possible to get those splits out. But if you compare that to the 6th generation, you just have, pretty standard watch split. They are thicker than a normal watch split. I've not been able to find any other than from Garmin themselves. So they're kind of thick and chunky watch splits, but you can actually remove it with standard watch split tools, or any kind of tool that can remove such a split there and replace them. Also, if you use watch bands that need the splits removed to be able to mount those, you can no longer do so with the 7th generation. So that's just one thing to keep in mind as well. And that's kind of a downgrade. I mean, if Garmin had issues with this system here, and they just fixed it with the 7th generation, then it's not really a downgrade for longevity. But I've not personally had issues with the 6th generation, and compared to the 5th generation and prior to that, where we had like screws going through, this is a little easier to have actually accommodate if you want to, like I said, use those watch band where you have to remove the split. You cannot do so with the 7th generation, and that's definitely kind of a downgrade. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, with the 7th generation, or the biggest upgrade rather, is the new GPS chip. You can now log on to all 3 bands at the same time. You can do that on all the watches. Plus, if you get the titanium versions, then you can actually have multi-band GPS, almost like having 2 GPS units in the same watch. You also use a lot more battery. So that's just one thing to note. But if you are in an area where the GPS accuracy struggled with the Fenix 6th generation, you should definitely get a better result with the Fenix 7th generation. And that's also been my experience. Just the fact that you can log onto satellites much faster on the 7th generation of watches. That's always been an issue of mine. When you get out and want to, go out and run, you start an activity like you see here. I'm inside the run activity. I'm indoor right now, so of course it won't really find any GPS at the moment, but it could take quite a long time to actually log onto the satellites, even though it's the location that I have logged onto satellites the day before. It struggles sometimes, and just standing there like 10, 20, maybe 30 seconds before it actually logged onto satellites. Whereas on the 7X, for me, almost always instant. I mean, within a second or two, when I actually get out and press the start button to get into an activity, it will already have logged onto satellites. And sometimes even when I'm in the stairways or not even outside, it will always already log onto the satellites. And I also have noticed the accuracy on my runs have been quite a bit improved with the newer generation of watches. So that's definitely a big upgrade there. Maybe the first kilometer or so it can be a little off with the 7 if you haven't logged onto too many satellites, but it will definitely get much better, and I find it pretty accurate. Not 100% perfect. No GPS unit is 100% perfect, but it is much better than the 6th generation. And that really comes down to it, in my opinion. Do you need the faster GPS lock or better GPS accuracy? Do you need the touchscreen interface? Do you need a better heart rate sensor? Or do you need the better solar panels? Or even, I didn't even touch on that, but we have the, of course, flashlight here on the 7X, but only on the 7X. You cannot get that on any other 7th generation of watches, but that's also kind of a nifty feature. And I've kind of used that maybe every day ever since I've been wearing this watch as my daily watch. But do you need all of those features? Because right now you can also get the 6th generation at very attractive prices. It's been out for several years now. What is it, 2.5 years or something like that? As of this video, the prices come down quite significantly. You can get them very inexpensively. I wouldn't say inexpensively because it still is an expensive, big investment, but the 6th generation is just so much cheaper now compared to when it actually was new. So that's of course one thing to note, that the 6th generation is just so much cheaper. So if you don't need the newer features, I would say just hold on a little bit, because right now you can only really get the 7th generation pretty much only at retail price. Of course, once the stock will be a little bit better and it's been out for some time, the prices will start to come down. But as of now, you're of course paying a premium to get the latest and the greatest. If you really need those features, like I have really longed for a better GPS accuracy and faster lock to the satellite for so long right now. So for me, it is a definite buy. But if you're not that person and don't really care too much about the best GPS accuracy, you could definitely still get a fantastic watch at the Fenix 6th generation. And if you already own a Fenix 6 watch, should you upgrade? I'm not really sure. If you're happy with it, stick with it for now. Definitely is still a fantastic watch. If you're coming from an earlier generation of Garmin watches, maybe at 5 or even a Fenix 3, I would say it's a definite buy, because it is a great investment. You can have a lot of years going into the foreseeable future, and you'll just get a product that is just so vastly better. So I can highly recommend the 7th generation of watches. I think it's a pretty big upgrade, even though I wish Garmin had done a little bit more. I wish they had included LTE on all of the 7th generation of watches. I'm not really sure why they didn't. Maybe the price would just have been increased quite significantly. I also kind of wish that you would be able now to answer phone calls on your Fenix watch. I'm not really sure it will ever come to a Fenix watch, because I'm not really sure there's a room for a speaker and a microphone on such watch, if they even want it on a Fenix series of watches, Garmin. But that's definitely a feature I am missing a little bit. Would also be nice to take some ECG measurements on the watch themselves, but of course you can also just get a nice chest strap and do it that way. So it's definitely a serious piece of tool. And for me, it is worth it to get the 7th generation over the 6th generation. I've actually put my Tactix Delta on sale, and I am about to sell it to a buyer here very soon. So this is probably the last video that will feature the Tactix Delta of my Fenix 6 watch. So it's a little bit sad, but I just cannot go back to not having that touchscreen, not having that fast GPS lockdown and accuracy. Actually, this flashlight there had actually improved or impressed me quite a bit. And also it is significantly lighter, and I noticed it lighter on my arm compared to the Tactix Delta, which always felt a little heavy when I was doing an activity. Don't really notice it in day-to-day life, but when I was in an activity, it was definitely a little heavy at times. Anyways, this was just my comparison here between the 6th and the 7th generation. Of course, you can find some affiliated link down in the description below if you want to buy any of these watches, and of course support this channel. If you have any questions, of course, put them down below. I will try my best to answer them. But that's pretty much it for this video. I hope to see you again in a future one. Until then, take care.